Hello, my name is Roy Poyan, and I am the Director of Families Impacted by Opioids. I want to thank you for joining us for this next episode of Fentanyl and the Family in Harm's Way. We want to take a look at today the area of successful lifelong recovery. Finally, we're going to talk about something that's positive. I know a lot of these topics up to now have been very almost draconian in the sense of disaster and pain and suffering, challenges that are exhausting. And I apologize for that. I feel for what you're going through. In many ways, I have a lived experience in this, and I understand what you're going through. So that's one of the emphasis that I put on what I do and why I'm doing this is because I wish somebody had done it for us. We would have turned out so much better had that been the case. But back in those days, we weren't thinking that way. So today we have this advantage. And with that in mind, successful lifelong recovery is absolutely achievable. An overwhelming majority of people achieve successful recovery. Now, the question is, that's nice, Roy, but we're talking about me, meaning us, meaning you. What's your reality? Okay, well, oddly enough, you can prepare for successful lifelong recovery. And we're going to show you the steps of how you can do that. But one of the issues is self-care. We haven't really talked about that much. Well, okay, well, everything's kind of included. So your whole life journey is in all these 32 categories. And it makes sense that in successful lifelong recovery, you have to take care of yourself. And the question is, especially right now, you may not be feeling that way, but you will come to the point where that is available to you, and you need to know how to start to take care of yourself, while at the same time you're helping to maintenance and manage that long-term recovery environment for this loved one. It's not something that somebody can sit there and say, I'm going to give this to you, now do it the exact way we said. It's something that you build that are nicenesses, if there is such a word, to help you personally nurture yourself. And only you really know that. So let's gather around the family table and let's take some time to write out, what would that look like? Please don't look at this as being some kind of fluff and stuff. This is real. You taking care of yourself is very real. This is going to wear you down physically, mentally. You're gonna run into some things that are going to be terrible. I want to point out, you're going to run into some things all through this that are going to be beautiful. You're going to have little spots of incredible joy and gratification, satisfaction. You're going to see God in all of this because God is with you as you go through all of this. And therefore, if you are doing this in the loving kindness that is given to you and us as individuals, then you will be able to share that goodness at the moment when that goodness is going to be so helpful for you in keeping your compass pointing in the right direction with the strength that you need. So successful lifelong recovery is about you taking care of yourself, and that means financially, socially, spiritually. You need to be grounded. It's not just have a bath and think positive thoughts. There's a lot that you can set up that doesn't take a lot of energy, but once set up, you can tap into. You won't have to create it because it's already been kind of predetermined because you've taken this seminar. So come on, let's get started and let's gather around the family table and let's get to work on this. It's meaningful.
Well, welcome back to the family table. This is a more enjoyable topic because we're talking about successful lifelong recovery. And we're basically saying, okay, we've accepted the fact that this is a chronic disease and that episodically with acute care settings like treatment centers and mental health locations, we will visit them as needed. But most of our life is going to be lived out in the kind of like the chronic disease world management for this person. And because the families are involved in their lives, they will also to a certain degree. But we want to make sure of two things. Number one, that you take care of yourself, which is critically important. And we mean that for everybody that's involved in this person's life. One of the first things that they should be taking care of is themselves. And from their overflow, they take care of the person that they care about. I hate to use the analogy of the airline and the oxygen bag dropping down, but that's what's most commonly referred to. Now, with this in mind, you are taking those steps because you're taking these episodes. And when we start to look at self-care, we start to take a look at a topic called mindfulness. And in mindfulness, and you can look this up, it's a great expression that we give ourselves kind of the luxury of saying, I'm going to just focus on a very small, maybe even insignificant area. And I'm only going to focus on that in order that everything else in my life drop away from me. Wouldn't that be a great skill to have? And it is one that you can have. And mindfulness is a way that you can get there. I'll give an example, although it's going to be almost juvenile in its expression. But when I look at my coffee cup and I say, okay, everything that's going on with Janet, is bothering me. But for right now, I'm looking at this yellow rim of the coffee cup. No, I'm not going to think about Janet. I'm not going to think about finances right now. I'm going to only think about this yellow rim, and I'm going to touch it, and I'm going to circle it, and I'm going to allow myself to understand what it feels like between my finger and the cup, and it feels cold. And I'm going to focus on, it's not too cold. And I'm going to circle it. I didn't complete the full circle yet. Oh, there it is. That's a full circle. And that is kind of what mindfulness is. And you might think, well, that's just like dolly time. It is, in a sense. But what it does is it blocks out all the other things that are bothering you, and it gives you an opportunity to rest on something that you can cope with, that you can identify with, that you're using your different senses. If I take the time and I take a sip of the cup, well, now I could sit there and say, I had a sip of coffee. Or I could sit there and say, I kind of took the time to look at the coffee and the color and, what the creamer did to it. And then when I tasted it, my reward system reminded me how much I loved it before. My memory kicked in, and a pleasure. Dopamine was brought, to remind me of my satisfaction. So all that neuronal firing just went off. So it's not like you're not thinking. You are. I use judgment. Is coffee good for me? I use reasoning. Sure, but don't do too much. And I use logic. A sip isn't that great an amount. So in this one experience of mindfulness, I paid more attention to drinking a cup of coffee than now I've really forgotten about Janet. And that's okay. And we want you to do that. There's going to be more of you available after you help yourself by including mindfulness. Other people use meditation. Chakras and other kinds of meditation is always, an opportunity. Some people use tapping. If you're not familiar with tapping, you can look it up on the internet. That's been effective in terms of self-care. And of course, the standby, you go for a walk in a place that's relaxing for you. Going for a walk right next to the New Jersey Turnpike on an exit ramp is not a good idea. But going for a walk in a place that you feel safe and comfortable and you're properly dressed for it is very rewarding. Because later you get to tell yourself, well, everything else went wrong today, but at least I went for a walk. Many people find solace in prayer. And that would be certainly how you do that, when you do that, more importantly, why you're doing that. will be rewarding for you. So whatever it is that you can use to help yourself, just make sure you're not using, false false techniques. By that I mean, don't overeat thinking that, I'm going to reward myself. I'm going to order a pizza and I'm going to eat 3/4 of it in one sitting with 3 beers. Not a good idea, okay? The same would be true for alcohol. We do find this to be very prevalent in the caregiver and the other family members. We find that like the sister, I'm not saying that this will be the case for you, but in many cases, not a lot, but many cases, we find cutting, bulimia, depression, anxiety, self-doubt, it's almost like a prescribed self-harm as a way of dealing with the fact that their family dynamic is not in their control, and it's very, like, nobody's talking about it, but it's happening in front of them anyhow. Their whole world is becoming unraveled, and my gosh, what do I do about this? I have to find a way as a family member to cope with this, and these are the chosen ways that I'm going to do that. And they may not be really good or healthy coping. So that's where we kind of like look at each other and say, hey, how functional are you in dealing with this? Because it is happening. And, if you're playing a certain role in the family, are you overdoing that role? Are you playing the hero to too great an extent? Maybe we should all go in for some family therapy. Just takes a couple of sessions, but it helps us to re-cue our way of seeing this and having an opportunity to more closely examine our self-coping skills is a real value. And you might say, Roy, we were talking about successful lifelong recovery. Yours, not theirs. These presentations are about you, the family member. They know and they are trained on how to handle their recovery, avoiding triggers, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectic therapy. All of these modules are a part of their learning and their practicing in their regular life now. Now, we would like to point out that it's been studied and proven to be the case, empirically proven study, which means a lot of different modalities of study techniques are applied and empirically proven, that word. And then best practices are typically written off of the results of an empirically proven studies. So with that in mind, we look at the recovery as a timeline. And when they're finished with their therapies and they're living their life now, the first 2 years is considered the abstinence 2 years. It's an extremely volatile period in time. They are very vulnerable to relapsing over the first 24 months. And they need to be engaged, okay, with professional services. And then and that doesn't necessarily mean they will never need it again. And I'm just saying it's very intense that first 2 years. This is what they've told us about this time period. And then from 2 years up to 5 years, it's considered an area of repair. And that's where their cognitive thinking is more engaged. They're using better judgment. The prefrontal cortex is more driving the mind than the pleasure and reward and response system is with the dopamine. So, the drug is out of their system, and now at around year 2 to 5, they're really able to start to fix some of the things that are not going well, because they can see them more clearly. And then at year 5 plus, which, by the way, at 5 years abstinence and sobriety, they drop to less than 15% likelihood of relapse. So that's not an endpoint, but it certainly is a marker that would suggest we're doing good. It's been 5 years. And that doesn't mean that they won't have a hiccup in the future and relapse. And it may just be that, a hiccup or a bump in the road, and they get back on the track pretty quickly. But the fact is, we are paying more attention to them as family members for the first 5 years than we would have to in the years that go forward from there. And that's considered the growth years, that 5-year plus. Now they're really starting to be able to thrive and grow. So have patience is really what we're doing. And we're in the study guide of your book, turn to the section for successful lifelong recovery, and you'll see that we're really kind of helping you to understand that communication is your number one tool. It's your best friend. And for you to understand how to effectively communicate with this person is a real act of empathy and kindness and love on your part, that you would take the time to, let's face it, you're being asked to make a lot of changes, but hopefully they're changes that are improving you overall. If you become more effective in communication with this person and what they're dealing with, it's very likely you're going to become more effective in communication with your partner, with people at church, with people at work. It's just one's going to bleed into the other. You'll be a better person overall. And we tend to look at strife and problems and say, it's a strife, it's a problem, it's not good for me. Actually, when we strengthen ourselves in our response to these types of things, we do become better. We take on more skills, and all of a sudden, we're more adaptive. And for that reason, we can be more empathetic and compassionate, because we can afford ourselves the luxury, and I don't know if luxury is the right word, but the fact is we can now actually respond in kind in a way that is meaningful and, as a resource, helpful for this person. So what we do notice about them is that their communication is problematic. They have low self-worth. They are dishonest in their conversations. They're full of shame. They have lack of proper boundaries. They're constantly challenging boundaries. They have high expectations, and they're angry. So these are all outlined in the study guide for you to then read the paragraph and what these mean. So you're going to be looking at yourself saying, all right, well, given that litany, what do I do? Well, you would want to take a look at contemplation. You need to consider that maybe you need to contemplate on what's going on here and step back from it for a minute. And maybe in prayer or in talking with other people, give it a chance to gain its better understanding before responding. You are able to control your environment better than they are. So with that in mind, you are able to support them a lot more than they're going to be able to support you. So if you're looking for a tick for tack, don't, because they're not there and won't be for quite some time. The support will generally be from you to them, and that's okay. And then you might want to take a look at the difference for you between being compassionate and being empathetic. Because in empathy, we tend to be more understanding of their situation, and we separate their behavior from the person. In compassion, we're looking more at the event, and we're being compassionate about the fact that this happened to you. But in empathy, we're being more along the line of, I understand how you must feel. Okay, so they tend to bleed together. But when you get mature in your understanding between compassion and empathy, and that becomes more of a repertoire that you're comfortable in identifying, when am I compassionate and when am I showing empathy, I think you'll find yourself to be able to straddle those very well, and you're going to feel good for it. The balance of time, money, what's reasonable is under your control. They don't really know how to balance things, but you do. And then your self-communication, the way you talk to yourself. I can't believe you just said that to me. I am so mad that he would address me with such disrespect. Well, that's your self, communication. You're talking to yourself the wrong way. And that kind of, talking is really going to hurt you. So you want to take advantage of the fact that you do have more control over your self-communication than they do. And you'll want to use that so that it's to your advantage and theirs. The nature of the relationships that you have will be impacted. So in successful lifelong recovery, the ability for you to maintain healthy relationships with others is going to create the kind of environment that is healthier for them to live alongside of. than if you were having this happen to you and you're also like letting off on somebody else about something and it's displaced anger. You're really angry at him, but you're just taking it out on his brother, and that's not fair. Okay, he was late for school or whatever, but you really got overly upset about it, and it was more because you had to drive Jerry to work, and you were late getting him to work, and that made you look bad. So you see how a lot of this becomes so intermesh in terms of successful lifelong recovery. And you probably thought I was going to give you, a list of 222 things that you can do to make your life a successful lifelong recovery. Well, I've got news for you. That list doesn't exist because you haven't made it up yet. That's a list that you have to make up, that somebody can suggest for you these certain areas to consider, but it's going to be a list that you make up. And that's what we want you to do in your workbook so that you have the opportunity to take what is presented here as your learning lesson for successful lifelong recovery and then start to apply it into the workbook. And so the question then becomes in the workbook, and I'm just reading this from this, what do you see? You need to take things for what they are. And then if you're seeing social withdrawal or isolation, then, identify it as that. If their refusal is that they're not willing to take ownership of certain things, you might be asking, well, Roy, are we talking about Jerry, or are we talking about the other family members? I'm talking about everybody. This is you looking out of yourself and saying, these are my relationships. And are these relationships, are they socially withdrawing? What am I seeing in Jerry's brother, Billy? Okay, and what's he showing me? And then what's my relationship with them? And what's everybody's eating habits? Remember, this is an environment and it involves everybody. That's where we just moved the chess pieces. We sat there and said, no, we're not looking at moving, rook to pawn 4 on the chessboard. We're looking at the entire chessboard and all the pieces now when we start to look at an environment and saying, how are these pieces in life daily moving around? What's their relationship and how well are those relationships functioning? So this is the environment, and that's what you are actually able to kind of control. How you participate in the environment creates this environment. And that's why we want you to look at relationships and communication and being able to see what is being presented and identified for what it is, as opposed to saying, well, that really doesn't matter. I don't need to pay close attention to it. Maybe you do. And that is where a counselor can be really helpful. So if you're going through this journey and you want to have a successful lifelong recovery environment, you really need to consider bringing on a therapist to your family and all your family members. And it's not like you got to meet with them all the time, but it would be a good idea to get together for maybe 3 or 4 sessions, create a baseline so that they can understand the family system. I'd recommend that when you call your managed care to find out who's in network, ask for a family therapist that does Bowen family therapy or systematic therapy or multi-family therapy, because these are models that have been proven. Actually, Murray Bowen back in the 1980s had created this, and once again, the word empirically proven, but had studied it to quite an extent and is now universally accepted as these are very effective models in family therapy. Worth you making sure that the therapist that you're working with practices and has practical application and experience in using these models. Bowen family therapy is what you want to ask for. And by the way, NIH suggested I told you that. They said that in all of their literature, they recommend this as being the most successful proven type of therapies for our families to be asking for when substance use disorders is a part of the family dynamic. So going back to the workbook, you then would sit there and say, well, so what do we do about our coping skills? How did the coping skills become involved? Because we're kind of including those in each one of these different issues. Well, you will be determining a solution, but it's going to be based on a very specific aspect of what we said. Remember, communication, relationships, how you're dealing with things, what you're seeing. That would be the issues that you would be looking at. And you would be developing a decision on what it is that's happening and how you want to handle it, and then creating and designing a plan of action around that. We hope that this has been helpful to you. There's no doubt in my mind that when you read the title and you thought, okay, successful lifelong recovery, we're going to learn how to do this. Well, I only started you on learning how to do this. You will not get in any of these categories anyone that can sit there and say, I'm going to tell you what to do, and then you're done. And you've got it, and you run with it. That's not likely to happen. But what you will find is that each time you're asking yourself inside of these cases, each time you're addressing and determining a solution, you're going to grow. And then you're going to combine, and you're going to combine, and you're going to grow and grow and grow. And the reason that you're doing that is, this is what is going to create a loving and nurturing environment in what is a hell-like situation that you have to deal with either way. So it makes sense, by gaining the knowledge of these different issues and then taking it further by creating a self-study on your own part, you're going to really have a better life, even though the life that you have is not necessarily the one that you thought it would be. It can still be extremely rewarding. And that's our goal. Hello, I want to thank you for continuing to view our episode. And we're now going to work into the area of the 3Ds. This is an important characteristic for the family to develop skills in. And we'll start by taking the time to look at an issue and then determine the issues based on the area of determining a solution, developing a decision, and designing a plan of action. By using your Module 3 workbook and going to a specific issue, you'll be able to find that the first step in that 3D skill set is the FTR, the Family Transformational Model. And the Family Transformational Model is a set-up way, each time the same way, that we will take 5 categories to look at in determining a solution. And each category is going to have 3 questions. So let's get started. The first is to define the issue. Naturally, we'll want to know what the issue is. The word issue is really problem, but we're saying the word issue is, the reason we're saying the word issue is it's just a little bit easier to digest, because it's not always a problem. Sometimes it's just something that's happening, and we need to determine a solution to it. The next question is, how does the issue impact the family? We need to know that. We need to know, we have an issue, that's fine. The issues can exist, but if it's impacting the family, in what way is it impacting the family? And then, what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? That's very important for us to know. The fact is that this issue exists and it's impacting the family. We tend to believe maybe there was something we could have done to kind of get ready for it. And if there was, then we would want to have taken those steps, which is what all these episodes are about. And then who can help assist us and the family in our response? So we want to start to ask ourselves, we know that there's an issue, we know that it's impacting the family, and there are things that we could do to prepare for this, but we're probably going to need a resource, information, another person outside of our family, or maybe one of our family members specifically can use their functionality and contribute. So we want to identify that. And then what should the family expect as their outcome? And kind of a start with the end in mind thought, where we're saying, if we're going to do something, it's going to result in something. So is that result desirable? Is that really what we want? Because if we're going to create a solution, then we want the solution's outcome to be what we expect it would be. So in each of these categories that I just described, 1 through 5, there are 3 questions, and we're going to ask ourselves each of these. Let's go back into the first category, define the issue. Clearly state what happened or what will happen. We want to know very clearly what happened or what's likely to happen. And then write that down. Identify who's involved or who should be involved, and then what would you like to have happen or like to see happen. The third question in every category is going to be used. You'll see how in just a minute. But just remember, the third question in every category, so this question right here, the way you answer it, will be reused. Now the next question is, how is the issue impacting the family? Who in the family exactly is impacted? In what way are they impacted? And then the third question is, what is needed to move forward? And then the third category is, what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? The 3 questions again. What needs to be done? And then prioritize that list. Who needs to be involved? And then what will it look like, the third question, what will it look like when completed? Then the 4th category is, who can help and assist the family in their response? The 3 questions are, how to search and organize this organization to help you. In other words, it's not enough that you know you're going to go and introduce yourselves to a treatment center in your community. You want to start to determine, how do I look for them and organize my way of seeking help, because it might not just be that group alone. You may also need other services to kind of start to create a who can assist us. And it may be many different types of people. What to ask from them, and then what to expect. Remember the third question, what to expect. And then the 5th category is, what should the family expect as their outcome? Well, that has to do a lot with timing. And if it takes a certain amount of time, let's be realistic of what that is. That has something to do with the expense of the involvement, of getting involved in this issue. And then the third question being, required changes, our changes as family members, for this response to successfully take place. Now, let's state what our solution is. Hey, this is the great news. You've already developed your solution. By answering each of these 3 questions, the third question in every category, you'll pull forward now into your statement. So your first sentence of your statement is the third answer in the first category. What would you like to have happen or like to see happen? Well, that becomes your first sentence. So what your first sentence for your solution statement is, what we would like to see happen is, and you just pull your answer from there to here. Do the same thing with the second category. How does the issue impact the family? Using the third question's answer, what is needed for the family to move forward? So now your second sentence is, what's needed to move forward is. And now you're accumulating these answers from these categories, the third question, and it's actually becoming your first sentence, your second sentence, your third sentence, your fourth sentence, and your 5th sentence in your solution statement. So your solution statement is going to sound something like, what we would like to see happen is, and what's needed to move forward will be, and then the third question from the third category, what it will look like when completed will be, and then what we expect will be, and then what's required for us to have a successful response is. Now those are your 5 sentences. You've just constructed your solution. And this is how you go about using a model for creating a solution. For any issue in life you have to face, you can use this as a way of approaching it. Now let's go to the other area, which is the second coping skill, making a decision. Let's make a value-based decision. Let's make a decision each time that kind of balances with what we value most. So first we want to determine what are our values. Well, the best way to do that is to write down on a piece of paper, what types of things do you as an individual value most? And each member of your family can do this in a kind of a group exercise. And then once you've done that, I value love, I value honesty, I value relationships and sharing. These could all be an individual's 1, 2, 3. Then prioritize them. Which of the 1, 2, 3 is most important? Then have each member of the family do the same thing. And then you can sit there and say to the family, what was your number 1? What was your number 2? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? And then what was your 2? What was your 2? What was your 3? What was your 3? And where you start to see many people in the family say, well, my number 1 is relationships, my number 2 was trust, and my number 3 was love. Well, then you talk to another person, they say, well, my number 1 was love, my number 2 was personal expression or confidentiality, or so they mentioned something different, but they did mention love. And then the third member of the family happens to mention love also. You know now that love is a value of the family. So whatever decision you make, you want to balance it on the fact of, does this disrupt our values? If it does, at least you know that it does, and to what degree. You're calculating that. But at least also you're including, what do we value most? Let's make sure our decisions don't counter that. And now, in the first step, we're going to identify exactly what's happened. And this is, by the way, in your book, okay? And it is for each of the episodes. Now, identify exactly what's happened, what happened, how did it happen, who did it happen to. Then the second step is analyze the situation, assess the problem, identify the problem, and in what areas did the problem create an impact. You're writing all of these down. The third step of that the third step in the decision-making model is, what is the number of one contributing factor? What is causing this issue to take place? You need to know that before you make a decision. The fourth step is, now that you know the number one factor, you need to go out and find out what information there is about this. Your primary source, you're going to go to the actual person or organization that's involved with this and ask them, what is this issue, and help us to understand it better. The secondary source would be, somebody's telling you this happened, or somebody suggests that you should do something a certain way, and it's coming from somebody else other than the primary source. It could be an article, a clinical paper. These are all secondary sources, and you gather them and you make them part of your primary secondary information gathering. The third area that you look at is your gut. What does your gut, because that's often where our faith comes in, and other things that are very important when making decisions get included. So trust your gut is what we're saying in the decision-making process. The fifth step in making a good quality decision is where you're taking a criteria and saying, let's take what we're going to make a decision about and let's balance it on the criteria to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. And this will ensure safety of your loved one. Is safety a part of what's being considered? And do we have the resources that are needed to do the decision we're looking at? And then, do we understand the timetable? Is it realistic? And do we understand the negative impacts? Because every decision has a positive and negative. Well, identify what the negative outcomes might be so that you can weight the factor of, is this a good decision? And then would you do this if, would you ask others to do this if they were doing it for you? Meaning it was done for you or to you. Is this still a good decision? These are all areas that you want to take a look at. The third coping skill is in the area of the family plan of action. And everybody could say, well, Roy, listen, we're just going to go out and do it. Well, it's going to get done a lot more effectively. I want to warn you that the addiction industry is not organized. And then again, either is the family. So you're taking two disorganized organizations and you're putting them together. So a plan is a very good idea. The other factor is you're going to more than likely require the assistance of a lot of different groups. And as time goes by, those groups are going to change. And now it's a whole new set of groups that you're dealing with. When you're at the hospital, the ER, that's what that is. Then you move over to detox, that's what that is. Then you move over to therapy and treatment, and that lasts for 16 weeks. That's what that is. Then you're looking at sober living, recovery, maybe incarceration, and then reentry. On all that's involved in that. So there's all sorts of reasons why a plan put on paper based on the decision and the information gathering that you've made based on the solution that you know you want to use are very good ideas. It all comes together with the plan of action. Then you take the plan of action and you go find a professional to help you. Everything that we've done up to now is to position you to a place where you can be properly assisted and directed and supported. This is what's often missing in the families. This is what exhausts the families. This is where the families get into fights internally on. So, for that reason, we're going to apply the 3D coping skills. Determine a solution. We're going to develop a decision, and we're going to design a plan of action. And we're going to do it each time. I hope this is helpful for you. I'm confident it will be.